streaming. Okay, we're trying to go live here. And okay. 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 And if the cooler's too loud, I can turn it down, but I have to keep the space cool. I just have the swamp cooler in here and some fans blowing some air around. Especially if I'm in starting up OBS, it just goes through and the recording system gets warm. So let me see. Okay, so it looks like I'm getting some viewers now. How's the audio? Do you hear the swamp cooler running in the back? It's running on high blast. And so behind me, I have my Reply Turbo system up on the bench, and just to kind of give a view of that. And I do have my Hypertech modded. I think it's a Type 2. Off to the side here. In fact, it's funny, I just picked up the front Model 80 bezel cover, and this one I do have a bezel cover for it, but it's down the storage where I've just grabbed these systems. I grabbed the two Reply systems first, thinking that was what John's story, the system he had. He had a locked Model 80 case. It's marked as a PS2 Model 80 486, and so I was making the assumption that it was a rebranded turbo board, Reply turbo board that IBM would use. They'd have it as a system board upgrade, and they did that for both the Model 70 and Model 80, and where a complete replacement planar that you put in there. And that did have IBM BIOS to those. It didn't stick with the Reply BIOS. And that Reply BIOS, in particular for the turbo board and the power board, it puts up, there's a lot of splash screen. And the actual reference diskette, or the program that runs that, you could even run that from a hard drive to configure the system. And it's better than a standard IBM PS2 in a way, or at least the older models of PS2s, because it can go through and have the system running in a large effect without necessarily being configured to that equivalent of the reference diskette. And both the Reply turbo board and the Reply power board have, I mean, and they appear very much different from the IBM planers, of course. They're marked as the Reply planers, but that Reply turbo board and Reply power board use the same configuration utility. So that's listed at the Arden tool. I can go through and I can even give links to that. I'd like to run through and just, I've got, as I say, I've got the Reply board, or the turbo board behind me, and of course it doesn't have ROM basic. That's going to be, you know, just one of the downsides. I actually, on both of the Reply systems, I believe I have good diskette drives in those right now. I don't have for the Model 80 board with the Hypertech CPU upgrade in it. I don't have a working, I don't even have a diskette drive in there at all. And I have two of the full-size hard drives. It makes it really heavy, but there's not a controller or anything else that's in there. I think it was an Adaptec SCSI controller prior to that. And so I could go through and put that on the bench and run through the ROM basic routine. What I was trying to do is run John's story through what's called the Planar ID. And that is in fact, I'll get that. And that's just a routine for going through, and in particular on microchannel systems, has the ability to go through, and you guys may have seen video about that. I've gone through that on video, probably older video. Maybe the production quality wasn't so great, but this is the what I'm referring to there, as far as the retrieving the planar ID from the system. And I'll give a link in the chat if I can. There's the assembly language routine, and there's the basic routine right there. Now what can happen is, if you do back-to-back I/O port reads, you can get corruption. And John's story, when he was running the routine I gave him, and this is the QBasic one, just like I have on the back system here, but he was getting just odd, non-valid planar IDs from that routine. And the easy way to modify that code is just to read the port twice, is the one way. And this routine goes through for, it outputs to a particular setup port, and it's hex 94 for the planar of the unit or the system board, and 96 hex for any adapter. And you would index it by in the follow-up of what you wanted to look at in particular. If it were the adapter, if it were hex 96, you're giving it the relative adapter slot number, and the system gives you a response and gives you it in 2 bytes of information for what that value is, for either to ID the system planar, or identify the adapter. And there's very similar process for both the planar setup and the adapter setup, the actual configuration that the reference diskette does. It recognizes what adapters in the slot, and then it throws the particular bytes to the adapter for what it has saved for the configuration. So let me go back. I want to see on the YouTube side. Okay, just to make sure I've got people climbing on. I haven't seen a response. Okay, Chris says I can definitely hear the cooler. And is that overwhelming my voice or not? I'll have to see if I can get a response. I know that there's probably a delay. And if so, I'll just disconnect my microphone and I'll go over there and I'll cut the cooler off. It's actually going to probably rain here. Let me go through and do that. Okay, so I went through and I've cut off, and in fact, really any moisture, as I say, it's probably gonna rain here. It's a little bit overcast, and so there's just about as much water in the air, and that makes it humid anyway, which can affect the heat. I do have some fans still running. I want to make sure because the CPU on my OBS, it's doing about 20, a little bit above 20%. That's normal for even when I record though. 20 to 25% CPU use. And as long as I keep up a good frame rate, which is marked as 60 frames right now, we're good with that. Now, further interacting with the page I have up, down at the bottom I have the chart, and I was going to give a link to that. Let me shoot the link on that into the chat. Okay, so that link has been put up, and okay. So yeah, that put up a overlay. I think my system thought it was searching for something, and what fresh heck is this? Okay, now it's bringing up a Microsoft Edge, which is not my default browser, and acting like I'm searching for the weather. I don't think Cortana was going through and listening to me or anything like that, but Microsoft spying on you. No, my Cortana's not active or anything else like that. So let me get back to OBS. As I was saying, I've got the chart, and there are duplicates. We do have asterisks in there, and I'm doing it from Major Tom's site. I have the same page. Me and Tom, we just coordinate a lot of the time, of course, if I go through and update any information. And I typically at the bottom, I'll have, well, maybe at the top, he's got maybe the last modified date. Last update, 6 April 2021. So not all that, just a few months ago. And you can see below the IBM models, and it doesn't necessarily have to be microchannel. There are even ESIA models and other things in there. PC server lines of what they give. And that really, a lot of time, the Planar ID really depends on the riser as well. And even some of the starting ThinkPads, the 700, 700C, 720, 720C. And then we also have the industrial PC. And that's not the straight gearbox. That's based on the Type 2 Mul 70 planar. And Alfred Arnold in Germany, and he is a newsgroup member, but he's not very active on the group now. He has one of those. I have a 7541, which is based on the Model 50Z planer. And then you can see down below, we're going to dig through the Reply. We have the Reply 80 turbo board and Reply 80 power board. I also have that Reply 70 turbo board effectively as a system board upgrade as well. Rebranded to IBM. I've got that in a case, and I actually want to go through and make sure that the caps are good on that before I run it. But if you look to the Reply 80 turbo board, that E2FE, that is the same planar ID, and there's your Japanese models even mixed in there in that chart, the PS/55s. So the about the middle of the screen there, PS2 model 8046 has the same planar ID as that Reply turbo board, even though the BIOS is different, all the other things. That planar ID is more of a function of integrated into the planar itself, actually. For the models that have the slots, they don't have a riser for the adapters. It's set to that. It's always going to give that. Just saying it's dependent upon the riser, the Model 76 is going to give a difference from a Model 77. Even with the same, if they both have Bermuda planars, but the different riser is going to give a different planar ID. And that's just my mom's actually calling me on my cell. I'm just going to ignore her. She's, just at the front of her house. She's actually roasting chili, so she's probably telling me she's got chilies available if I want them. And I didn't go through and mute any phones or anything like that. I just muted the AC as it is. So let's go back. We've got the and as I say, I've got the and I'll probably get turned around just to be able to face the screen, because I want to go through and I don't think I have a mouse driver loaded. I do have a mouse connected. We'll just go through and use the keyboard. Okay, why don't I have keyboard? Okay, I got the light flash when I replugged it in. Huh. Okay. I'll leave the diskette. I'm just going to try and boot from the diskette again. And this actually has a Pentium Overdrive CPU in there. You can see the splash screen of the Reply is very different. Has its own little thing. And yes, this is chock full of RAM with that Pentium Overdrive processor. You'll see this go up to 256. Should. Yeah, and it gave that 24T/66, and I think that's just more of a generic identifier for the Intel CPU. Okay, time and date, since I don't have an auto exec bat, and see, enter worked. So there, yeah, rebooting brought that thing around. I don't know what it was off in, just sleepy time or timed out. Okay. And what we're going to do, and I could have loaded the command line too. Okay. And here, this may be a routine that Tom got me, just because, as I say, it's got the additional port reads in there. And I may have had an issue with this, and so I kind of talked to Tom. I mean, I was being simplistic with my code before, and he gave me a whole bunch more port reads that I could try, and I can't even remember if I... Okay, so yeah, we did get this going correctly because this is the Reply Turbo board. And so we're going to have that E2FE on there as the planar ID. So for this diskette, this configuration, you know, as I say, I've got my power board here as well. Do I have a CPU? Yeah, it's got like looks like a 486, probably DX2. It's got a heat sink on there, no fan. But I've got that, and since it's the same routine, I do have a battery. It shouldn't ask me to take me through the config otherwise. I could even put the power board up next to run the same routine. No, I don't. I don't have a diskette drive in there. So that's kind of out of the question unless I went through and switched, and I don't like switching those ribbon cables so hasty. You know, you'll end up just trying to, and especially the Reply, they go through and it's not a continuous 40 pin IDC. They go through and they change the pin out a little bit. And in fact, I might go through. I do have a drive. I don't have a drive cage in the power board case. I've got these drive cages around, but I may go through, since I have these screws loose. Well, almost loose. And what we'll do okay. And that's probably a real good view. That's, you know, from my camcorder. Paid $20 for the camcorder. Able to zoom in. It's all the way zoomed out for this view. You can see that Pentium overdrive. And I think I probably showed these on video before when I've gone through them. Again, probably not real good quality. Okay, I still have the page to interact with the or the web page. So there is the turbo board and the 8 SIMs, and these are these are actually the 40-bit, and it's what they call EOS SIMs. And these came on like the model, or excuse me, the server 520s, both the microchannel and the ESIA version. And coincidentally, and it actually has some, you can see kind of some square chips there. Incidentally, these are the same SIMs that you can modify to make them into a for the L40SX. You want to talk odd now, you just have to notch them higher and you change the parity detect, but you use 2 of them and they're 8 megabyte. You convert them to effectively looking like 8 megabyte a piece for the L40SX. And they used to, back in the day, as you can see, with me having 8 of them, I've got 4 of those on the on my power board. My tripod's not real good here on the top. These were relatively affordable and easy to pick up back in the day. Probably a good 15 years ago at the very least. And then it's got that Dallas 1387, and that's got the additional 2 kilobyte of non-volatile RAM that it does, and that is for holding the microchannel configuration. Reply does this a lot. I've gone through, you see some of the other features on the of course, the BIOS chip behind the I was looking for my pointer and I probably have it in the bench. It's a metal pointer. I might be better just picking up the paintbrush. You can see the BIOS chip back there behind, and then there's actually a Cirrus Logic, and it's just off screen. That's a real good view. There's the Cirrus Logic, and I think that's a the 5426 or 29, something like that, maybe a 30. So these replay power board and turbo board for the MUL 70 and model 80. Okay, that's a 5426. But they all have Cirrus Logic. Replay is kind of known for using Cirrus Logic video. And then, of course, it has just solder pads for extra VRAM space there. And this is a little bit almost in coordination with IBM in a way. And just the, you know, I'll get through to the MUL 53s, SLC2. And that was, you know, Reply originally came out with a planar for that it called the Reply 55. Same thing, planar swap for your 55SX that had a 46 SLC2 CPU on it, and it but they used the Cirrus Logic video there. And then IBM liked it so much that they made their own MUL 53 SLC2. I think Gregory Ward has a couple of them. I've got a few of them. And that actually, IBM made it into another model as well of the model 55 LS 486. And LS is land station. And but it was just treated as a higher end 55 SX for that. Even there, it still did a lot of time have local drives, local hard drive on the system, and of course a diskette drive. So IBM did take these the Reply planers in a lot of instances and just rebranded them with their own BIOS and made them into the PS2 models of themselves. And I wanted to kind of focus in. Now, the power board is shown on the Ardent Tool site. I've tried to get Tom, and I do have the manual upload that he's put on. I've tried to get him to also have develop a page for the turbo board, because that is not listed, does not have a page and a diagram showing this planar on at the Ardent Tool. And Tom, you know, he does a lot of stuff. He's got his own life. He's got his own interest in study and everything else. I think a lot of that is typically diagrams, doing the diagrams of these planers. And because that does take time. And Lewis originally did a lot of the diagrams for the planers. In particular, you'll see the later planers, the 386, 486 level, in particular the Model 95, Model 90s, that was Lewis's interest, still is to this day. He wasn't interested in the 286 level and the low end, the Model, anything to do with the Model 30, Model 25. So William Walsh, and to a little bit of regard of me helping William, UXW Bill on YouTube, William Walsh, he did a lot of the diagrams for the Model 25 and Model 30 level, just because Lewis wasn't interested in doing that low level. Lewis has started to pick up a little bit of interest in the Model 30, 286 levels and things like that now. Not so much for the 8086 based Model 30 and Model 25 originally, but what I was just wanting to show with this as I go through and bump my tripod, you have the pod that's just out of view on the screen. But this is for a planar CPU. They'd go through for your even a 386 DX, or I'm trying to think what they call their the plastic quad flat pack pin out that could be put in there, and the same thing for the effectively the Blue Lightning CPU, or that 46 DLC2 that IBM had the same effective pin out for that. That probably could have been planned for that inner row of pins, and then the outer row would be your plastic quad flat pack 46SX CPUs, just to give it a basic CPU on board that you could use. And of course the Pentium overdrive is in a ZIF socket there. There's more of the EPROMs. You can even see that the one is copyrighted as IBM. So, and this is the reply, effectively the reply BIOS. But it's interesting that IBM has the marking on there, even with an FRU. And I'm real hesitant. I'd like to go through, and these are typically flash anyway. You can flash upgrade them. And those flash upgrade are out there as well. So it's real easy to have the image for the contents of that. I'm very careful with trying to pull those EPROMs out of a socket like that. I did on the N51 SLC board, and that's a notebook, and it delidded the EPROM on me. And you can see there's a lot of unpopulated otherwise chips there. Now the silver chip there that's actually a synchro stream chip, and that particular chip is on even comparable IBM models. I think it's one of the complexes, and we were more interested in going through and the one that's on the power board. And so I've kind of made up my mind here in a way. What I'll do is I'm going to put the power board system up briefly, and I just want to go through, and we're going to Alt F X. Okay. And I'll leave the diskette in the drive. I'm not going to be able to put in the power board. I wish I could go through and do the planar ID from it as well. And if I'd been a little bit more prepared, if I had a cable, I do know right where I have a diskette I could use right off the bat. And so let's get this back over to my camcorder. I'm shooting through the openings for the microchannel slots on the back, shooting my remote through there for my clear click remote, going through and controlling the clear click that's just behind there. And I won't need to connect up cables. I'll just have them off to the side for when I do put that Model 80. Because really I'm interested in reproducing what John Story is seeing on his system, almost trying to reproduce exactly what system that he's working with to make sure he can get a good planar ID out of it. And you can see my clear click box there on the back for what I do to record video. And this is the power board. Okay, and I'll work with adjusting those things in a while. And then this has, you know, different layout, and you also didn't see up above on my turbo board, I have the rare Intel cache module, the one that had the pans that's on a flat assembly. It's not, you know, preceded the Coast cache adapters, and those are fairly rare to find around too. I don't know if sorry to go back, but that's the Intel cache module that's on that board and has headers on either side to go through and to plug in. And typically in the reply scheme of things, if they have a turbo board and a power board for the same model, the turbo board was the earlier model. The power board was later. And here with the power board, and this has actually a page on the Ardent tool. And as I say, it's probably some 46 DX266 maybe that's there. And I could fire it up. In fact, it's funny, I have a closed drive bezel on the front, and that diskette cage is entirely empty. And then you can see on the back, grab my pointer again. Okay, so we have this synchro stream, and this looks like actually what's on some of the other PS2 models, and it is from IBM again. Nice blue chip, very similar manufacturer to other synchro stream, but this does not have a match on the IBM side. Looks like to be that this is developed for whatever reason for the Reply power board. You can see the Coast cache module here in the back with the lever. In this case, the Cirrus Logic, and I think it's the same 5426 chip. So, and then Reply, it's a 5434. So it's a later generation Cirrus Logic chip. And it is important to note that the Cirrus Logic driver for Windows 95 and Windows 98 was limited to capped at 1 megabyte of VRAM. And the Windows NT driver, I believe, was not. You were able to do the 2 megabyte VRAM. And that just comes into play on this one, of course, since I have the additional VRAM populated there on the back. Just changes a little bit of the layout. It's got the 4 SIM slots. Again, those are the EOS modules that would have come on the server 520s in a lot of cases. In fact, it's funny. These are qual samples that I have on this one for the power board. That's the way they're marked from IBM. Even though there apparently were a release level. And then again, the DS1387 chip that goes through and saves the microchannel configuration as well. And this would be the diskette connector. Reply still does the 40-pin connector, but as I say, different from the Model 80, and they actually adjust the pinouts of that a little bit differently. If you put one of those reply diskette cables in a standard Model 80, it goes through and it shorts out the system, and thankfully it just doesn't. The system is smart enough to where it doesn't power up. It sees the load, and you will not get the system to actually power on and to drive anything. But you don't want to go through and have the wrong cable in there. And then just like the turbo board, back a little ways on the turbo board, it is back in here, and you have your IDE, and both the turbo board and the power board, as well as most of the other reply planers out there, like the reply 55 that I was talking about. Instead of running the DBA ESDI drive, it does IDE. And of course, it's limited. That it has that 504 or 512 megabyte limit for the drive capacity, without any other, if you run software that can modify that, give you LBA support, then you're able to do it. But the older IDE standard, but at least it's IDE. And really, that's not a part of the system configuration. I don't really necessarily believe. You see it in the reply setup, and it'd be even interesting to see on the rebranded IBM models, like that Model 8046, Model 7046, with the IDE support on how IBM goes through and identifies it. Because, here it's not effectively as a slot, because you do have the 8 effective slots there on the board. And, and that's the maximum amount of microchannel slots, since they're enumerated, that you can have. So it just runs that as more likely just as a system resource, so the adapters don't have any adapter in it, doesn't, so it wouldn't conflict. The system BIOS is aware of that fixed resource of that IDE ports, then it would also be, there's probably some sort of setting up the boot order as well for the hard drives, because microchannel, a lot of time, in particular like the Model 80, you want the adapter higher up, just being right next to that drive cage for being the dominant drive controller, or what the boot drive is connected to. And of course, IBM runs their SCSI a little bit different from everything else. In particular, the Adaptec, it's kind of inverted way. But there is a view to the power board. I want to go through and I want to pause. I want to bring up. Okay, and I'm just looking for effectively a little bit of feedback, as it were, in the comments, but that's fine. You know, I'm just trying to see how my pace is going, and see if somebody wants me to focus on a little bit more of something as I go through and cover these. And I'm going to go through, since this one's not plugged in either, and I may have to I can probably reach over. I can probably leave my mic attached, and it'd be nice to go through and plug this in, but you're just going to get it's going to go through the point of saying diskette error, please connect a diskette. And I wish I'd been a little bit more prepared and had a cable hanging off of that, or made me I need to make some more cables, diskette drive cables, so I can and this is about as heavy as you get. Yeah, and it was a okay, zoom out, and it was probably an Adaptec board, and this is just the passive adapter that's in there right now. It doesn't have a diskette drive. The hard drives don't have a controller. They're not in the why did it zoom back in? This is just a passive diskette adapter. I don't even have a battery connected in here or anything like that. And it's even funny because I have on my the reply boards, I have that side battery and the speaker pillar in there, and that's all in that DS1387, the configuration. You don't need a battery in the system to go through. Now, a little bit of indication I did see in like John Story's later pictures of the memory modules he had to identify it. You know, the Model 80 is going to have the memory modules in those areas, and it's very easy to recognize. In fact, these are the sugar cube modules. Very easy to recognize that those are those older, slower memory modules. That a Type 3, both your Type 2 and your Type 3 planar for your Model 80, have the CPU underneath this drive cage. And it's sometimes a little bit more of a challenge to tell them apart. But the Type 3 can only run the 4 megabyte memory boards. And those look a little bit different. They're lower, actually, wider, and they have just the black plastic chips on them. Is a way to kind of, at quick glance, if you've got older memory boards in there, you know it's a Type 2. The Type 1 actually has the CPU down here in this quadrant on the planar. So that's a quick way to tell the Type 2 and Type 3 apart if you can't see where the CPU is, because you've got these big drives in there kind of covering up everything. And I don't know, I might go through, since these are disconnected anyway. I mean, I do have the SCSI cable, and this is kind of funny. It was all the way to the left, almost like a reverse of the, and these still should be righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. To free up the drives, because I still may want to go through there and at least get the drives out of the cage. I have kind of this good cable management in a way down here. Just all these twists when the Adaptec board was in there, and the way that I have the drives connected there, and I want to have them independent of one another. I need to have them disconnect because they're heavy. I don't want to move them out of the system. I should just, okay. So that'll get the front, and you bring out the front one first. The full-sized. And I actually think it's like SCO Unix that's on these drives or something like that. It's really, it's a different OS. I thought I'd already had those spun all the way to the left. And really, and that was what I was about ready to make the comment between the Reply turbo board and power board. On the power board, they had the CPU in a better location up above in this area, not underneath this drive cage, like they did even if you had the drive cage in there on the turbo board. The pod is above the floor of that drive cage, so you can't have a drive in the lower portion here. You could maybe do a half-height CD-ROM or something like that, or some other way of getting the drive from fouling on that CPU that you would have in the center here. And so the power board is a little bit better designed. The Type 2 and Type 3, you know, IBM took the CPU from being down this quadrant here, and they put it underneath the drive cage. In this case, the 386 DX, if it didn't have this Hypertech module in here, would be right under this bar of the drive cage. And there's, you know, this drive cage is wonderful, and having the drive power from the power supply, that's great. But there needs to be a substitute for this with the smaller drives, or even in the case to be able to move it out of the way, to take it so it doesn't go through and interfere with what you've got below that, with the CPU. And, you know, with this Hypertech, I just wanted to show over here, that's the 387 DX socket there for the coprocessor. And of course you don't need it since it's a 46 class CPU. Similarly, you have the DX in there instead of the SX, so you have the coprocessor functionality. But again, and you're only able to go up to the DX. You're not able to go up to a DX2 typically, because you can't even have a heat sink on it. It's just right under that other drive cage brace, so it sits right there. And John had gone through and he did a picture off to the side here showing the 46, and I recognize it pretty quick, as Lionel did too, that it was the Hypertech board. And I'm trying to remember, I think the Hypertech, I don't know if it was rated for the Type 3 planar. I know the Type 1 and Type 2, you could use it. The Type 3, of course, has that 64 KB cache, and the cache controller. And I'd have to look at the documentation for that Hypertech upgrade to see. Let me go over to the, okay, still, yeah, so if you do have any feedback in comments, it's great. I mean, it looks like the stream is still happening, and I'm seeing all the text comments. I can go through and, I mean, I could probably focus and thank people for showing up. I've done live streams, so to speak, before and captured that, but never really to the point of going to the point of having viewers active and having that the chat box off to the side and to have to watch that for comments that may be giving me some sort of feedback at the time. I do want to see, let's look at OBS again. Yeah, CPU use is still below 25%, 22, 23, 24%. And it's still telling me I have 60 frames per second. And I don't want to have the video where it's jumpy or something like that. Let's see, kind of zoom out and pay attention to my microphone here, cord, cable, because I'm going to go through and since we'll have access to ROM basic on this unit with no drives, I do, okay, so at least get the keyboard. And even though we got a mouse there, system's not going to be use it. And of course, this is as I say, there's no battery to this. There's so it's going to complain about the diskette drive. It's going to go through and complain about the configuration. But we want to get dropped into ROM basic here. Okay, shoot through the microchannel open slots again. And the other way to recognize the Type 3 planar is that it has two of the auxiliary video extension slots up here at top. And if you can see the slots, if you can see like what this passive adapter is in, if they this one here has the AVE extension. If the one that the passive adapter is in also had that AVE extension, then you know it's a Type 3 planar as well. That is the only planar that has two AVE slots, and of course the regular other portion of the slot is 16-bit, but that'd be for like your 8514/A adapters. And Tom on the SIF news group has pondered there's probably close parallels to Japanese development for the Type 3 is what it looks like with that. And the Type 3 Model 80 planar is also the only PS2 planar that has a socketed keyboard controller chip. And we've pondered that. I pondered a little bit because they use that Type 3 planar in one of the mainframe connectivity. 3172 Model 3, I think, uses the Model 80 Type 3 planar in there. And it doesn't, it has a built-in little pop-out little keyboard. You wouldn't have a full-size 101 key keyboard attached to that. I speculated for that, but of course on the 3172, it has the same keyboard controller that the PS2 model does. So Tom is saying that maybe that's on the Japanese side. That where they go through and switch it around. And of course, we didn't get to see any of the errors or anything like that for before it dropped us into the ROM basic. What I want to look at now and I'm aware it can be late in other areas. I'm on Mountain Standard Time here, and but I wanted to see. I gave John Story the code that I wanted him to run. Okay. So when I gave him, I want a copy of what I gave him because we're going to run through it just like, and you're going to get to see all my slow typing. I'm a two-fingered typist. You break two fingers and you ruin my ability to type. So N hex, and I should know this almost by heart, or if I stop to kind of slow down. N hex 7F. Okay. Our 20 line is high byte, and ROM basic goes through and it will capitalize your variables if you list the program that you've typed in. And 101. Okay. 30 is okay, and I guess it is the back-to-back retrieval of those high and low byte. And it's N hex 100, 40, and it's the Planar ID is the variable name. Equals your high byte times 256 plus your low byte. And then you go through for line 50 and you write or you out to the port saying that you're finished with the system setup. So you're writing out to, and as I said, 94 hex is the system planar. 96 hex is working with adapters or the planar resources that are identified as adapters, like your onboard SCSI for like your Bermuda or your Model 85. There are some things on the planar that are treated as being on a so-called slot. Okay, and then 60 we're saying to print in hexadecimal string planar ID. And I've left some, I've gone by tens here, so I've left some available. I could add line numbers. So if we do a list, see there, it's capitalized all the, and so we do have an error. I mean, I can see on line 30, low byte. We don't have to really be concerned about capitalization here, but and hex. How did I get that mixed up? It's actually input and hex 100. So we want to catch that right off the bat. Okay, let's list again. We're doing good. More to see. Let's go through and run that. And that's very similar responses as John says he was getting FD16 and FD50, and it does stabilize on that FD16, FD56, FD3E. So the and bringing up okay, and now we want to go through interact. Okay, so Model 80 20 megahertz. Let me get it up kind of center of the screen. That type 2 planar, PS2 Model 80, 386, 20 megahertz is your type 2 planar. That's FDFF for the planar ID. So we've got the FD that the so-called low byte is our value okay, that is not giving us correct, and we're only doing out, and then so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the back-to-back port reads. So one way to do it, in basics it should be so slow there shouldn't be an issue here. 7F. Okay, so what I'm doing in kind of to make up for the port reads, you read the port, or you can go through it and do and this is actually going out to the port, so there's no problem there. Actually, I need to go through and I need to read. We should still get the same effective value with that. So line 15 is kind of superfluous. We actually need to go through for a, let's go through and add a 35, and we're going to say low byte, and in reality it's just doing one, well, it's doing, yeah, it is doing back-to-back port reads. So I'll probably go, even though the high byte's reading correctly, we're going to go through and okay, that looks good. I'm also going to give it a 25 and say high byte equals input and hex 101. So let's do a list of that. Okay, so I'm going through and effectively just reading that ports twice. Since they're back-to-back reads, that's one way to go through and to get around that when you're doing back-to-back port reads. There's also and Tim Clark is in the habit of he goes through and he writes to a particular invalid port effectively that's not used otherwise, just to spread apart the port reads. And that's still telling us. Okay, so there. Let's play a little bit more here. I'm going to give it a n hex 94. And I think even the text that Tom gave me, it was going through and writing that so let's give it another way that we out to the same value to the same port, in twice, and we're still getting a lot of that FD16, FD. It did the FDFF briefly, so let's do a list again, and we're going to do a I just don't know why. I went through a lot of time and I was getting the Planar ID back in the day. I don't ever remember encountering. And of course, sometimes I was using other software to go through. I don't think it's because of our variable. I'm wondering. Is it our string value? So we're gonna modify 40. I'm gonna say planar ID string. I don't think I'll encounter anything for. And as we say, we're getting. It seems like we're getting the correct high byte value. Plus our low byte. Okay. And we'll also have to modify and see planar, we're printing it as a hex string. Print hex string D string. It knows it's a string. Okay, so list. Okay, and I don't think it will complain. Okay, type mismatch. Doesn't like that being defined as a string. And just as a variable, it should be able to grab equals I just don't know why this is okay, 60, and we can do, let's do it this way, print X string well, and that's because we don't need to multiply it times the value if it's just we're treating it on its own. And we'll do a 70 print hex string low byte. And I don't even think I had, I don't have any commas or anything. It should do one after the other. FD7E, D16. So that the low byte value, for some reason, is kind of playing with me there. Oh, and I've gone through and I didn't even have the all the text I went through and typed in. I was going through and wasn't even visible for how I was going through and modifying code. And the last thing I was doing is running this. I was trying to go through and out for the, the port reads, doubling those up. And I split the last one to say where it does the, when I do run, it does the FD for the high byte and then 16. And so it looks like that high byte is the correct value of FD, but that low byte is commonly coming up with 16 and other things, and I'm not sure why it's going through and doing that. But it was worth a handy exercise to kind of see if I could get to see if I could get a valid response like John's story could run. But now, since he's been inside his system, it's he knows that it's I think it looked like a type 2 with the hypertext upgrade for what all the bad says of that Model 8486. But okay, and we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes now. I mean, that's a nice, relatively informative live stream, I guess, but pretty long. I was just hoping to get a little bit further to where I could rectify by, and everybody understands my intentions there. That's what I also looked at early on when I started collecting systems. That I would have, I tried to get through and get every possible model that was out there, and then, you know, that I could set up for different submodels or in all the configurations that are out there in the wild. And that way, if somebody did have a system that they're having difficulty with, I would be fairly able to go through and to recreate that same system, get that system set up within at least the basics, to be able to help troubleshoot that a little bit more by replicating the issue on my end and seeing what I had come up and things like that. Now, clearly for the Type 2 planar, it does give the correct planar ID as all these other systems, what I marked on that chart. That was an earlier work of, and of course I did have it up for the long time that I was sitting there typing away at the keyboard. This was an initial work of Peter Wendt, probably more than, and you can find it in some of the side pages. He identifies the model, and Peter's still around. He's got other interests now, or it's where he infrequently comes back on the SIF news group, checks in from time to time, listens well enough. I mean, if people post there looking for his input, and I think it's the current moniker he has is PS2 Pete. No slashes, no dots, no spaces, of course, anything like that for the username he has on the group of PS2 Pete. But he went through and he had models, and he went through and he had a page of the models. He identified the planar ID that they'd have. He identified some aspects of memory and things like that. I went through and consolidated that in my own way. And for the Model 80, and I don't remember, it was, I could look back and see the conversations I had with Tom between the, whether it's the Type 1 and Type 2 or the Type 2 and Type 3, there were some planar IDs that we were looking at, and that was when I was running the system information tool on the various systems, and Peter had two of those. He had them inverted. He had, you know, the one model with the other planar ID, and we figured that out through the system information tool. And that actually should have been the last correction I did to this, to the planar ID pages. I got them corrected, and I don't remember offhand. See, it's got the Type 2 should be FDFF. Type 3 would be FFF9. And then the Type 1 of FEFF. I think it was a Type 1 and Type 2 that were transposed. And I got those straightened out for him. And I probably, it wouldn't be good, I go through and link to the SIT supported models, but on that it would also show the planar ID, because the system information tool at some levels does go through there and work with that planar ID. In some cases it excludes that just based on what it has to detect for the models. And as Major Tom figured out, the system information tool, first off, does not work on any 286 CPU or older. The PS2 Model 30, Model 25, Mul 50, Mul 60 even. System information tool does not work with those at all. Doesn't work with the basic gearbox, which is based on the 286. It has to be a 386 SX, 386 DX, minimum, or 386 SLC for the system information tool to go through there and work on. And I was actually thinking earlier, I need to go through and bring out programming machines and go through and develop my so-called WinSID, and going through and refreshing that system information tool with my own design, a substitution that will go through and better identify, and will identify those earlier models too. That is going to take me getting a system up and kind of coding. I can probably do that to where I don't run this main recording system and the chance to get warm for it. I just have a CPU back here that I can go through and just type away my two-finger typing to get those programs going again and to get that running. But I hope the people that watch the live stream, short notice, I'm not able to do any announcements, of course. I'm below 1,000 subscribers, so I can't go through. And it was relatively short notice of me saying, hey, I think I'll just go live with this, and that'll be the way to do it, rather than recording content. There's a few videos I've been kind of thinking of developing a little bit, getting those up and going through those. Was planning possibly one for today, but it just didn't. It came for the live stream, and this may be a way to kind of change things up a little bit. I would, I'd like to do this, but it's always to the point where it's not air conditioned in here, and for me to be able to cool it, I have that swamp cooler up, and who knows, I may go through and play back. I'll go through and check that level of the swamp cooler I have in here, just to kind of see if how audible it was compared to my voice. And okay, let's get to the chat before I wrap this up. I probably don't want to go any longer than an hour and a half. Okay, so kind of at the bottom, and Jesse Cousins asked, did have a question that dominant port only refers to microchannel, or ISA has a similar thing. So no, that's particular to microchannel. It's not even carried over to from the earlier ISA, or to even the kind of a different way of the ESIA. And as I say, a lot of the irony, a lot of time of ESIA, my main exposure to that is by the IBM PC servers, IBM models. It said that, hey, the IBM did microchannel, and so the Compaq and other people, they went out and they developed the ESIA. And although it does have very similar 2 kilobyte storage areas for those the adapter configuration, it does it in different ways. Even for the ESIA, IBM, like the PC server 320 or 520 that are ESIA submodels that support the Planar ID, you can run the Planar ID on them, and the Planar ID does not work for non ESIA models that are not IBM. There's, of course, the brands that of Reply, Apricot, all the other people that developed microchannel systems went through and also mimicked that system setup. And that's something we're going to have to probe out a little bit more with the gearbox the 7552 gearbox. That's based on that 286 CPU. When I've got the power supply that's popped on me, because me and Tom, the back channel is that we talked a lot about that. It's got a different microchannel setup path, and that may be the initial microchannel setup routine that Chet Heath developed on the so-called Delmarva machine. The Delmarva machine was a system that Chet Heath named himself. And by the way, he is on Facebook. He hasn't ever responded to my polite queries. Tell him, hey, there's groups on Facebook over here that you're pretty much revered for being the father of microchannel. I don't want to bug him too much or anything like that. But the Delmarva machine was a 286 base system. The Computer Chronicles has a system. It's a modified Model 60 is what it looks to be. And it has a board in front. And the interesting thing is there's connectors that are unused in that interface. It looked like it probably had a microchannel board underneath that plugs in a particular way to connect up that board that was just over the top of this bottom area of the Model 60 case. And those connectors looked like the gearbox and Gearbox 800. And of course, the Gearbox 800 is microchannel as well. The interesting thing to the Gearbox 800 with the interposers that it has both microchannel interposers, and I have the ISA interposers. I don't have any of the microchannel ones that they have interposer for 32-bit, 16-bit, all that. Even with the video extensions. I'm trying to get some of those microchannel interposers, but the Gearbox 800 is kind of unique that you could have ISA and microchannel adapters mixed in the same unit. And that is conceivably the only system that is that way. I mean, the regular gearbox, the 7552, it has that older kind of microchannel configuration. And you can run ISA boards the same way. I mean, it's designed for ISA boards. And the microchannel, that's why we want to experiment with that. Now, the Model 60 system I was describing that Chet Heath was brought on that Computer Chronicles, that was actually a secondary CPU. What he was demonstrating was that the PS2 line with the microchannel bus could go through and have a CPU that shared the load on the system. Or helped out the main CPU that was on the planar. But Chet Heath had that Model 60 set up with a board that very much looked like the gearbox. And the gearbox systems, the gearbox and the Gearbox 800, they're the shrouds that you slide in. And there's even a thought with those that those could be more than one CPU as well. The 7552, that's just gearbox, no other number behind it, based on the 286. The Gearbox 800, there were the two submodels of one with the 386DX CPU, the C40 submodel was with the 386DX, and the D40 submodel was with the 486DX. And those had the CPU modules. The 7552 had separate memory modules for upgrading the memory. There's a possibility that could be where IBM had that you could have more than one CPU module on the system, and it would share that interface. And those systems are on the back plane and things like that. It's effectively a modified microchannel pinout for the connectors of those. But so I've gone over, and it's going to be an hour and 35 minutes. I think this is probably just a. I know that you guys may find this informative and everything else. I'd love to keep talking, but it may be a point where I have to. Okay, and Lionel Harris brings up. He's brought up. It's not a question, statement. David, about that hypertext upgrade, all the documentation I found states it's only for 16, 20 megahertz planars, or 16 and 20 megahertz planars is the way to read it. Type 1 or Type 2. Search for a week trying to find an old post where maybe someone tried it on the 25SX. And so I made a little bit of a comment earlier, and to that sense. The hypertext, as far as I was able to determine, was Type 1 or Type 2. Didn't work with the Type 3 planar for whatever reason. And that's why the hypertext upgrade that I have here is on my Type 2. My Type 3 has the Kingston upgrade, which is a little bit different, a little bit more developed, and is able to be placed on any of the Model 80 submodels. So type 1, Type 2, or Type 3. But I have the hypertext on this. John's story, and that's what I was suspecting. And I saw just a brief circle on my YouTube studio, so I don't know if it's doing dropouts or anything else like that either. Now, John Story had a separate Type 2 planar, and it was speculated that, hey, he got the guy he got it from got in a system board upgrade that was Model 8046 that rebranded turbo board, and thus took out the Type 2 planar to put in the replacement planar. And if both of those are Type 2, who knows where that second one, if that's just a spare or whatever. Good thing probably for him to have on hand. But yeah, definitely I agree with that hypertext only seems to go up to the Type 2 planar top. It doesn't go up to the Type 3. That correlates with what Lionel's saying there, to my knowledge as well. If you have any info, insight, or old documentation not publicly available, I'd love to see it. Scared to just try in the 25 megahertz planar. Not sure if the daughter card can handle the extra 5 megahertz. Well, I'd probably be able to handle it, but the Model 80 as it was, and that matched memory sort of adapters that they have in there, it was an odd thing. And Tom had to remind me, Major Tom had to remind me, the initial PS2 release, April of 1987, did not have the Model 80 in the lineup. It had the Model 30, 8086 based, at the ISA model, at the low end. And my speculation is even that IBM didn't develop the Model 30 themselves. I think Seiko Epson Japan did that development, and because I think IBM was focused on the microchannel aspects, and just said they wanted some other company, hey, give us an ISA Model 2 that we can pair in. The PS2 Model 30 is very comparable to the PC convertible that was exactly a year earlier in the release, April of 1986, and has the same styling, external styling, and things like that. And Seiko Epson appears that they started a little bit of the interaction with IBM for the PC convertible, the 5140, Model 5140 series, with the static RAM that's there, and some of the chips, like the ROM BIOS chips, are branded as the with the Seiko Epson logo. And then the PC convertible, and the main thing to it's how people bought it and everything else. The appeal of that was based on the screens. The first screen was fairly horrible. IBM did a backlit um, display for the second release, and then even followed up with a third panel to try and get those characters on that screen more readable, and with the backlight. And it's probably where Seiko Epson Japan was involved a little bit in that, the super twist, so to speak, components of that screen. IBM did buy a Seiko Epson factory right about that time, the 86, 87 time frame. It wasn't talked about where they used it with the PC convertible, but it was used with the PS/55 models, the Japanese models of the PS2 that were separately developed. Some of those had built-in screens, and probably brought in that factory for the development of the screens of those units. And so Seiko Epson kind of got mixed in. But the initial release of the PS2s in April 1987, and also remember OS2 was not fully developed for it to go with that release quite at the time. That was a little bit delayed. But it was the MUL 30, it was the MUL 50, it was the MUL 60 for those 286 levels, and the MUL 70. The MUL 80, that Type 1, did not come into play until a few months later. It was finally released and everything else. IBM, it looks like it had some things with the match memory, and the differences that the Model 80 did in a way, even differently from the MUL 70. Now, the MUL 50 doesn't have extended CMOS, and even the 50Z just has the 4 slots. They put those adapter configuration right in the regular CMOS, so they don't have that additional 2 kilobytes of additional microchannel configuration area and stuff like that. So the 50 is kind of a lead-in. The 50 and the later 50Z, it appears like the MUL 50 was kind of the initial development in a way for microchannel and everything. And then they later on, when they got some of those things more developed, and they released the 50Z, they didn't update the MUL 60 to be any zero-weight state machine or anything like that with the 8 slots. But you can see kind of the development. I mean, IBM, they had that announced date. They had to throw what they had out there. And the MUL 80 followed later. And it can be, the MUL 80 can be a little bit quirky. Even at the Type 3 planar level and everything else, it can be, there is those oddities sometimes that you won't see on a comparable MUL 70 or something like that. So that's why we go through, and that's what interests me so much about the PS2s, and to have that documentation out there, have the community, have the support, and have that SIF news group that ran for decades as a way. It was where the information started popping up, and Louis Olin took it on himself to compile that, start that out. We're trying to continue that tradition. He's still around, still trying to help in his way too, to get the documentation. When people pick up, like John's story did, get a system, you can say, here is the place for the reference diskettes, every information that you'll need on that model that we've tried to come up with over decades to have there to help out, to help someone in those troubleshooting steps. Let me read what other comments have come up. And thank you for the good feedback that I'm explaining things, because I'm very aware that I drift, I go off on tangents. There's so much information there, and I don't like to be to leave out any information. I need to be a little bit more to the point and show what my thought process is, and trying to get it out of my brain, to explain things without involving too much. But there's just so many aspects, and side little venues, especially when you talk about a company like IBM. And as I said earlier, them going through and taking the Type 3 planar, or even earlier planars with some of the models they did, the 3174 units. I mean, they went through, they had those planars developed, they put them in for that interconnect controller with their mainframes. And they had that more of a side, office with a link back to the big mainframe out there somewhere else, just as a way to connect up terminals, both on the coax side, on the TwinX side. They went through and they did those developments. They had the point of sale systems in businesses and things like that, that they had effectively planars that were repurposed into that point of sale device or anything like that. We saw those nurse workstations. We've seen those executive workstations. We've seen those other units that have the PS2 parts in them that IBM developed in a way. And sometimes IBM wasn't tracking along and they were using some rather out-of-date CPUs and things like that to develop their models. They weren't out there as cutting edge, but I mean, mainframe and mini computer was their forte prior to that. They developed the personal computers, but even there, a lot of that was still sometimes for terminal emulation and linking those PCs ultimately back to working with their mainframes, their mini computers. They didn't really think, and they thought in the business environment side of things, of not being someone that, even though the personal computer named, I mean, they started getting into the thought, yeah, people are going to maybe have this at home, even though it's a little bit more expensive for that level. And thank you, Chris, for saying that I'm ultimate fountain of knowledge. And I've forgotten a lot of what I know in a way. I look through, I have the benefit, I really enjoy where I go through and I look back on the SIF news group. And it's interesting to go through there and search. You know, if you're wanting to look up something, search on your own, because you'll get the members of whatever time, and you learn about these the mannerisms of the news group, of how we had the structure, what the names Lewis had for us, the way they referred to us, the kind of the interplay that we had between each other in that community. But what I did is, a lot of time I wrote down my day-to-day activities, what I was working on, what system I just bought when I received it, what the configuration was. And it's amazing to me to see a post 20 years ago that I wrote down the exact day that I picked up a particular system, what I bought it for on eBay. It's just amazing. It gives me amazing insight. But then again, I read some other posts. I talk about, I did this and this and this and this. And I was like, I can't remember that. And in fact, me looking at the live stream, I got way ahead of myself and going through and trying to be so quick that I have the still title as the live stream of me holding the 3270 adapter. I should have edited that. Hopefully for the replay, if I edit it now before I end, I can go through and we're going to do exploring the aftermarket PS2 Model 80. I can probably add discussion there later on. We're going to save that. Yeah, I'll probably add a nice little description or whatever else later on to that. So live stream ideas, and you guys know where to reach me to throw stuff at me. One of the things I thought of, and I've gone through and explained the moniker and things like that before. I do anticipate kind of what would be nice for a live stream to say, who are you? how did you get involved in this? What's your start? I'm sure people are always inquisitive of the stuff that I have, the models that I have, and things like that. And they like to see more than they have that I've been able to put out so far to show those off. But and I say a lot of time, for that, really that was a large portion of my life. That was hard. Those systems were, in some cases, hard fought and won, or there was very much where I had my collector's hat on at the time. I mean, I had to go through, and if people think that eBay was a different world and it was less prices, well, yeah, in a way, but it was just mainly of something of opportunity as the right place at the right time to pick up stuff. And yes, I've received pallets sometimes before of particular PC servers. I've gone through, participated in school auctions, the blind auctions of my local school district that were going through and distributing or selling off of their Model 25s and the servers that they had for the I-class. That's where I picked up that stuff. And so I've been in this a very, very long time. It's been a part of my life. Yes, I do have a separate life from that, now, but it's, I can foresee kind of a live stream that I would go through, and I love to see feedback comments. I want to answer people's questions, even in a format like this, to where they can throw out questions. I can go through and answer, document. Okay, thank you, Jesse, for saying about the amazing work, documenting everything, preserving history, bringing back memories of my days working for I'm assuming Digital Equipment Corporation. Like Billy Cannoli, you always come back to the main story. Okay. And that's probably a pretty good reference. Thank you, because I know I spin off on tangents. And the server and terminals is what I started on. And I agree. The IBM side, and I never worked for IBM at all. But I got into even banks here locally giving away their System 34s. And I say giving away for the price of hauling it off. And me convinced my dad, hey, let's get a flatbed trailer over there and load up all this stuff. And yeah, I'm probably sitting on a little bit of a gold mine. I do have 4 System 34s for the people that realize the size of those in my shop. And those are going to be moved out to a museum, or at least half of those. And it's nice that 2 of the models are the 10-disc magazine. 2 of the other models are single diskette. And I forget which ones. There's some that have the dual hard drives, the humongous hard drives. But I'm lucky that they're 2 and 2. They're kind of split, identical or mirrored. That at least 2 of those will go into a museum setting within the next couple years. Not here locally, but a friend. That will go through and develop on that side. That's how I initially got into that, was indeed the mini computers, so-called mini computers for all the sizes of the System 34. Later became the System 36 and AS400 line. That's how I initially got started in the, and then branched from there into the smaller stuff. But I'm kind of from that sort of terminal occasion too. So I think I've answered the questions or some of the things that has been thrown out. I appreciate the feedback. I love seeing questions. I know that you guys have enjoyed this for a lot of the limited audience. I wish I would be able to reach more people. Can see this live stream among my other videos, that I know you guys appreciate the content. You appreciate a little bit of that, of me putting out that knowledge that I've gained throughout the years. coming back. It's all in the community for me. It's all, it's not necessarily the machines, even though they're well built and everything else, but I like more for the interaction with others that are into the same hobby. I like going through this basic stuff and pinging on with the little basic code. I mean, it's built in ROM basic to go through there and try and extract information out for the system to tell me what it is in software as it is. The planar ID, going through and identifying what system planar that it has, and that providing, just keying off the information in my brain of what I need to focus on for that system, even if I'm not able to visually inspect it. And that's what I thought, and that's why I first jumped at the live stream, because John's story was talking about a locked box. He's not able to see what planar it's in there. He's able to see some adapters out the back, but there's the routines of running the Planar ID, which did not work so well in this instance. Worked on the, and again, that may be Model 80 quirkiness, because at least on the turbo board, it gave us the right response right off the bat from Quick Basic. If I'd had a diskette drive on the power board, I'm fairly certain that would have given me the right info. So I've got to work with that code a little bit more, and there's something that I'm just not, I've got to figure out why it's failing, and to go through and look at that, because I'm hitting the right ports and everything else. But that's what I really enjoy, was going through, and since these systems they're just that odd thing off to the side, that they have their own little interface, their own little way of doing things, those enumerated adapters that you can go through and query, hey, what slot is the adapter in? I can figure that in software. And that's being a step up from the ISA world, that sometimes you can detect whether a particular adapter is at ports or whatever else, but you don't know effectively. It's a little bit more of a challenge, and even for the routine to go through and detect that can be a very challenge. By a simple adapter query on a microchannel system, you can quickly find out what adapters are there, what system functions you have to it, and know where you're at to kind of fingerprint that machine. And I do, work with Major Tom a little bit on, and Tom is another fantastic individual behind the scenes. He has a large wealth of knowledge, and a lot of time by the email and the back channels, I'll go through and he corrects me, because he knows it so much more. I know that there's a lack of things that I sometimes can't do as well, that I don't understand quite as well. But he's got that wealth of knowledge, and he goes through and he can kind of develop and go through and figure things out too. And so we interplay a lot with that, and throw ideas back and forth to develop that stuff. So he's valuable, and he doesn't get often thanked enough on the Facebook group. He lurks a lot of the time, and it's times where he only gets to it after a couple weeks or anything like that. And he's the Gekon CZ comment that you see replying on some of my videos. That's Major Tom, and he's in the Czech Republic. Lots of hours of this is sleepy time for him. I would hope it's on the weekend, but it's Sunday for him, already, and I'd hope he'd be sleeping to working on things for getting up in his Sunday that's probably going to start here very soon, and whatever angles he's working on for the day. I'll have to send him some emails and find out kind of where we're tracking there and touch base with him again. I want to read through the December and thank you, Jesse, for that feedback, of saying thanks for your time and hard work. I learned a lot from this because, I have to go through and I have to. I'm at a point in my life that I've got to go through and look to things to feel valuable. Sometimes it's something that we all, I think, will deal with at some point. Lewis went through a lot of these encounters. Lewis has gone through, I think, probably some midlife crises at some point. One of the posts I saw from him several months back, and I'm not going to go into kind of how we feel or any personal details of anybody. I'm not going to normally reveal that, but of him asking, do I want to do something different? Is this going to be all that I'm supposed to do, or do I go on through and move on to other things and give them my time and things like that? And I understand, that he felt that he's kind of out there. He was, he's not ever going to go on Facebook. And he was even off the SIF news group. I was worried about the guy in a way because just with him being out of touch, I didn't know where he was exactly. Some of the time I was sending him emails, I would not get a response. I like checking into people and finding out what's going on. But he just abandoned. He got frustrated and he left the news group for a few months. I'm glad to see him back now. And I try and go through and check that. And I need to actually go through and develop a little bit more time there. But I'm saying that Lewis on the news group, he may need to hear that stuff too, of the thanks, the appreciation, because he got us all, he got me pulled into all this. I think if it hadn't have been developed as much as it was of how him and Peter went related to each other, for me to see that documentation and have that wealth of knowledge out there, and on SIF to be able to interact so much and write so much out and have other people interact with me, I don't think I would have stayed for all that if there wouldn't have been a Lewis Oland. So that's something to think about occasionally, being able to drop a line on the SIF news group to tell Lewis Oland, thanks for everything you've done over these last decades, going through and documenting. And Lewis had the term, it's SHIT, that he called super high intensity tinkering. There's periods after all that, of him just trying stuff. And a lot of that aspect of this, I'm the same way, of going through, replicating issues and trying stuff, trying to eke out as much performance as possible with these, that's what's pulled me in. I mentioned the SIF news group too, because there's been people like Unil Z, and he was in, I believe, Hungary, maybe Austria. I'll have to look through. And we kind of knew a real name out there. But as of probably, it's been maybe a year ago even now, his website went down. He's been out of touch. We've tried contact. That was the height of COVID over there. He's dropped off the face of the earth. And this is the guy that wrote the drivers, the better drivers of Microsoft for the IBM SCSI, for the Treble, the Spock, the Corvette adapters, wrote a better driver for the XGA2. So many more modes, so many more ways to get that screen set up that Unil went through and has in his driver, and they are nowhere else in the world. He's the one that did all that. And I would love to locate the guy, and I hope he's okay. But we're like that. We have to keep touch with these people, and I need to put a little bit more of the stuff I do on I put on Facebook back on the SIF news group. keep it alive. It's a little bit format that's dying off, that doesn't have as much interest otherwise. But you know, to also look upon that as a place to throw it out there. I do email to Louis Olin, but that's going to be the only other place he's going to see it is on the SIF News group. So, and then, yeah, Chris is saying he's got some ideas for December. I probably do as well. And I just have to look. Yeah, it's kind of kitschy for some of the month names. I understand how the community goes out there and likes to have those to bring to light. We have to think of some other nicknames that we can come up with too, or some of the coverage times that we go over particular things. Yep. And people saying ages, you know, I don't necessarily want to directly say my age either, but I'm in my mid 50s. And, you know, I'm not going to say midlife crisis or anything like that, but I mean, I think it certainly hits us all at some point where we just reevaluate ourselves. And even Big Clive was talking about recently, he had the thing about he had a poll question about the people in their 40s, you know, talking about effectively the midlife crisis as he sees it down there in Oz. You know, and I didn't answer the poll really extensively there. I didn't really go through that. There's a lot of changes in my 40s, but it wasn't necessarily a midlife crisis. I had enough of a life shift with that, with getting married at age 40 and going through and experiencing kids for the first time effectively in my life. And even grandkids just a couple years later on. I'd never had those experiences, and always heard other parents and grandparents talk about that and how they enjoy that aspect. And that's what my 40s were for me. Not any sort of midlife crisis otherwise. And you can see that reading through the SIF. I always talk about where I'm busy at my job, and that's a reoccurring theme. And then I go through when I started getting involved in the integrating my family, of the time and the expanse that took, and pulling me out of the loop in a lot of cases there off of SIF at times. And of course, I had other times later on of my Army deployment and things like that. Still kept in touch, kept on SIF. So that was trying to think of placing. Yeah, that would have been before my 40s for that deployment. But, you know, but it's been, that stuff has hit me harder in my 50s for going through and trying to evaluate things. Other people I do want to thank, I know that are out there. You know, I wish them well, and I know that they're busy with aspects. William Walsh, UXW Bill on YouTube. Great channel. And Bill doing less videos, in particular on the computer side, and me seeing how subscribers reacted to that. That's what pulled me into YouTube more, wanting to do videos. And I should have got involved in YouTube way back in the day at the time, but it just wasn't my thing, I guess. I didn't see where that medium would go. And but that was the reason I jumped into creating my own channel, was William. And I've interacted with him a lot in the past, and we helped each other in our little things. There was there's some speed bumps in there too, but that's just interaction as it is out there. I want to thank him for that, and thank him for having that channel and being the impetus. You know, I'd still be involved in YouTube even if he jumps back in, but that's what did pull me into that. So, to thank him as well. I don't know if he's ever going to be one of those Facebook guys either. And yeah, a lot of time when I say CIF, I mean the comp.sys.ibm.ps2 hardware news group. And I've put links in my other videos. Of where that is, and the common Google Groups format for getting into that. Let me give that link as again. I need to finish to wrap this up a little bit for all that it is, because and so here is here's the link to the Google Groups side of the of CIF, and then I played on words for the Facebook and giving it a good easy to remember acronym of using CIF for it as well. And I'll talk about times of the real CIF, and when I'm on Facebook, meaning that's that news group out there, that news group that's been around for decades. And there's news groups that cover other topics, OS2. I'm sure the ESIA guys are out there too. But, for the parallel adaptation of ESIA, that I think now you can get a lot further with microchannel, just because of the things that we have, the information we have hosted out there and from the CIF news group. People didn't seem like there's probably people out there, but I mean, that was server level too for a lot of the ESIA, that people didn't seem like they stuck around so much with that community in a way. So yeah, and Hugh says it great. And I realize that, for what he said of his age, at least you're here because there's a, isn't that, that wasn't a Jeff Foxworthy thing, but that's, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, old comedian. And, Ron Ray, I'm trying to think. And he would always express that he was, at the end of his act, that he's happy to be there. And he, because he's talked about earlier, and he has, I don't want to say con man, but he had an aspect to him that of talk about, jokingly saying run from the law. And he has one skit that he talked about getting fired at by a policeman behind him, and the shots of the policeman hitting the rear view, or the left mirror, and he says in trying to shoot him in the car up ahead, racing ahead of the cops, and those have the element of truth. He because he jokes and says, well, mind you that the officer is also driving his cruiser at the point where he's firing, and that he's so accurate to hit the mirror of the car I'm driving shows that he's able to do that. And he says, well, that was the point that I realized I needed to give up. If the guy is able to shoot that close to me, probably trying to hit him. But he'd always finish up, and like I said, I try to remember his name, but he'd always say, I'm happy to be here at the end of his skit, because there was always worse places he could be. And there's a lot of worse places that I could be. I understand that. And so I am grateful to always to be here, and to be continuing to provide information I know, and doing what I can for the communities I'm a part of, both online and in the rural world. So yeah, that's a very good thing, like Hugh says, of it's I'm glad I'm here now, because there's a lot of other places that I could be, including in the ground, that I'm happy to have. And I've recovered a little bit. I didn't want to say a whole bunch publicly about it, because It was just one of those things. I didn't sleep well last night, and what it was, we have an older schnauzer, and we lost the gray schnauzer that we had. It hasn't been quite a year ago, maybe about a year ago. But we have the black schnauzer, and he's aging too. He's always had respiratory issues and things like that. And I shaved him the other day just to get him in a more comfortable situation to where you can see the age slowing him down, the hard of hearing, everything else, and schnauzers have their problem. But last night, 1:50 in the morning, he looked like he had a heart attack. He went through, and he's okay now. I want to tell people up front before they go through and, oh my gosh, everything else, the dog died. But he couldn't get up. He was just flopping around the floor, and I was just trying to comfort him. Didn't sleep well after that. 5 minutes later, he's standing up. I put him and the other dog that we have outside to walk around, everything else. My wife slept through it all, of course. I didn't intend to wake her up or anything like that. But yeah, he was fine 5 minutes later. He's fine today. But we see things like that we have it a certain way for years. We have the things and the creatures and the people around us, and then all of a sudden one day they're gone, or it's a changed situation. Something happens, and that's why I say with UNLC on the SIF News Group, I'm very interested in finding out and we just don't have the resources for where he is to figure out what's happened. Why is he not been in communication? Why is he dropped off seemingly the face of the earth with his web content and everything else? Hopefully we'll have someone that's able to give a little bit of insight for us to eventually know what happened, or in an ideal world where he comes back and, sorry, I was being away, or being involved in something else, or even moving on with his life and having other things happen that he wasn't participating in stuff, and didn't see the need to have the web content that he has up. Thankfully, Tom archived a lot of that content. But that's the thing. We've got to look at that. We've got to see where we're going. Yeah, and Chris says amen too. And I'm just glad I wake up every morning. And let me tell people that if you see me in the morning and the daytime, I've already got the hardest job of the day behind me, and that's getting out of bed. If I'm on my feet, and once I get mobile, I do better just to sit up, get the fluids and everything else, out of the way so I can breathe and everything else. And that's a bit difficult sometimes. I've gone through, and I've been a little bit hard on my body. My grandpa always said, if he'd have known that he would have lived that long, he would have taken better care of himself. And I should have taken better care of myself in a way. I don't even have, and my wife has this schedule. She gets up at 3 and 4 in the morning, even on a Saturday like this, to go to work. And so I don't even have the help. I've asked her before, with your foot, push me out of bed to get me going. Because that's the big job for me in the day, to get up out of bed and get vertical and get moving on. And hi, Nigel. You may have to watch this in replay. I'm grateful for seeing everybody here. My stats say 5. I've briefly saw 7 or 8. I want to thank everybody for coming on and participating in this, giving me feedback and everything else. 2 hours and 20 minutes, close to it. Amazing amount of time, and I think that's a good note. And really, for all that, this doesn't have to be the only one of these. I'd like to do a lot more of these as a fill-in, and we'll see how possible that is. My system here, it's been able to at least keep up and keep cool enough around for my recording system to keep up with this. And I've enjoyed, doing the live stream. It went a lot longer than what I wanted in a way, but I'm glad that it was helpful to people, and I can do more of these very soon. Who knows? Even as I say, you guys know where to reach me. Send me comments if you'd like to see this as a weekly thing. If I'm not conflicting with anything else, anybody else out there for the YouTube stuff that they have set up. They want to see a weekly live stream. That's what I can do. I can't make YouTube announcements, but I can get set up with my viewers and the people that would be interested in watching. I would even love more, but I thought on Facebook to have maybe one of those room settings or something else in a way would have gone great. So if there's a different format out there too, that's a good thing. I'm not just constrained to YouTube. We can do the other things that work too. But yeah, people drop me a line and say, hey, if there's times that it works. And yes, Nigel, you can go ahead and ask a question if you have one before I end. And that'll be once I see that question, I can go through and how I kind of wrap things up from here. I'm even glad to see some of the names I'm not otherwise familiar with. And, even if you're on the Facebook group or consider getting on the Facebook group, we can get you in, that being the social media aspect now. If you don't do Facebook, there's people that don't. Get on SIF, do a little bit of introduction and everything else. We're happy to work you in to the community. Go further, I'm going to put my reading glasses on again here. I shorted my IBM Mull 35SX when trying to mod a drive to work with it, and I'm assuming a diskette drive. Any idea what I may have damaged? It says keyboard error and moto error. Any idea where to start? And the 35SX is even interesting. It shares a planar with the model 40SX, being the bigger system. I lost the link to your site. And to remind people, I do have my own website, so I throw up content up there. Oftentimes I duplicate stuff that I'm putting over to Major Tom. The Ardent tool is Major Tom. And he acknowledges all the contributions in the past, mainly of Louis Olin doing a lot of the early diagrams, William Walsh. I lost the link to your site. So that's Tom's site, and that's just ardent-tool.com. And then you can go through and even Tom has the Google search function for that, for going through and getting to the specific pages to help out there. So I don't know if that's actually damaged the floppy drive controller. A lot of the time that would be the related thing for a diskette drive. The PS2 sometimes can be fairly robust, that if they have something happen. The Mull 35SX and 40SX, along with those other comparable Mulls that released in the same time frame, can even run the 2.88 megabyte diskette drives. And that's just the thing of getting back, kind of wiping out the non-volatile RAM to go through the setup again, to get a correct diskette drive in there and seeing if it'll work for you. Because if it doesn't, then you're talking planar replacement. You're not going to be able to change out that floppy drive controller on the planar unless you're a soldering whiz, anything like that. It's an Intel chip. That should be the A2077 SL chip or something like that for that floppy drive controller, since it's able to run the 2.88 megabyte diskettes. But that's going to be a planar swap, and there are MUL 35SX and MUL 40s that do appear out there. The planars, you know, I don't know if they just come up on their own a lot now, and you may not have to replace things like the riser and things like that, of course, with that didn't effectively short out on the system. And you know, if your power supply still works, there's been a lot of issues with the power supplies for those Magnatech power supplies. But I've given you the pointers in the right direction, and you can always reach out to me, you know, for further details. Even putting a comment on it, on what you think is the appropriate YouTube video. I've done a few of those MULs, so you might do it there, and we can address it further and kind of come up with a solution. But I'm gonna have to wrap things up. I mean, because it's gonna be 2.5 hours probably, and that's good to hear that you're on the right path. And I'll probably go through and I'll end this in OBS first, and then look up on shutting it down in YouTube. But so, as I say, this is IBM Museum. Thank you.